So to start off with a little bit of history, a little bit of history into expense management. It all started, of course, copying receipts. These processes exist for decades. In the end, you have a receipt, you write it down, or you put it in, you type it into the computer, and you kind of digitize it into the ERP. So that's the first step. Really, really legacy, really old school. And then a lot of players think about larger ERPs, SAP, and that kind of stuff. They've started kind of digitizing that historic expense report based process. So they've taken the same process, they just kind of digitize it, but they haven't really transformed it yet. Then the next part is really where you start scanning receipts. I think let's say pretty much every single supplier nowadays would have a scanner, a mobile application. That's really pretty basic. But really where it gets really interesting is then actually what we call real-time expense management. So something that Rydoo pioneered starting in 2013. And this is something that really touches the entire process. You might wonder what exactly is real-time. It sounds great, but what is real-time? So if you look historically to the expense management process, it's really been expense report based. You create an expense note, an expense report, a claim, let's say, you build that claim over the course of the month, and then you kind of submit that. So you gather 10, 20 receipts, you kind of submit that. Then towards the end of the payment run, towards the end of the month, there is a kind of trigger event, let's say, for you to submit that expense report. So inherently, that process is not in real time because you kind of use, or you take 4 weeks to really build that expense report. Now, our vision and really the future of expense management is really transitioning that expense report based process where you use let's say a month to build an expense report. We transition that to what we call a real-time expense report. And the way we do that is really by let's say radically killing the expense report, killing the expense claim. We don't work with that anymore. We've moved to what we call an expense line level, where as a user, you're typically on the go, you're on the fly, you're incurring expenses. You don't like bureaucratic processes. You just want to snap a picture of the receipt, send that off, and kind of get it off your plate. So it's really linked to a human behavior also, and really trying to transition that to a real-time human behavior. Because in the end, everybody nowadays, they want to work in real time. Every single millennial, every single person, they have a mobile phone. They get instant messages, they get instant notifications, and so forth and so on. So real time is really key. Of course, it also impacts not just the end users, but also the entire value chain and the whole approval flow that comes after those end users. And in reality, that means that if you really think about real-time expense management, also your managers, your approvers who are approving that spend, there will still be some spend that needs to be approved. Other spend can maybe be automatically approved, but in today's reality, you still have a user who submits 10 expenses on a month to their manager. And typically with an expense report, again, you would have to reject the entire expense report because there's maybe one faulty item on there, one item which has a potential duplicate or maybe a duplicate flag or I don't know, a policy flag. So you'd have to reject the entire expense report, which means that as an employee, especially if you're out of pocket, you're going to be frustrated because you're going to miss a payment run. You're expecting that money to come in. You're going to be annoyed, let's say. But also as a manager, there is kind of two approaches that you would take. You would either say, okay, this does not look really good. Although the first 9 expenses, they're fine, but the last expense doesn't look good. I'm going to reject the entire thing. Or you're going to say, I don't really care. It's the company's money. It's not my money. I like my employee. I'm just going to click a big red button and send it off. I don't care about it. I'm just going to approve the whole thing, although there might be an error in there. So really the game changer by moving from an expense report based model to an expense line model is really being able to isolate a single bad expense or a few bad expenses, send that one back to the end user so they also know it in real time that has been rejected. They can amend it and maybe change something. And then those good ones, they can go through to the next part of the flow. And this is really how you actually can transform that process, because you'll actually, by creating a real-time process, you'll move to a truly kind of a flat expense flow, meaning that you don't have those peaks of workload, those peaks of activity towards that cutoff date or that end of the month or something. And you can actually really go to that flat flow where also your back office teams and your managers, they really are able to check that spend rather than really just, trying to process it as quickly as possible because people are complaining that they're not reimbursed yet. And then truly the future there is that real-time process will be supported by what we call AI and prediction, which in reality means, to give an example, where expenses are highly likely, that they fall within certain parameters, that the behavior of the users, that we know the history. So the model needs to be trained, and that you'll actually see that you can move to, let's say, much more automated approvals, for example. Why on earth would, in today's world, why would you approve, let's say, a parking ticket, a simple receipt? A parking ticket was incurred in the UK. It was maybe done by a managing director or an executive of some sort. And it's not older than 90 days. There's a receipt attached. It's matched with a credit card transaction, et cetera, et cetera. Why on earth would anybody need to have even, take even 10 seconds of a look on those expenses? So it's really that AI is really going to support to really simplify and make that whole flow much more human again, and reducing the risk of that flow. And then we'll go a little bit more into the challenges. Today, I think many of the guys that talked before me, they really delved into that already. So it's painful, it's time consuming, it's manual, it takes so long to be reimbursed for the end users. But also when it comes to end users, you need to think about adoption. In the end, spend management or expense management for that matter, it's not rocket science. It's a pretty simple process. It should be a pretty simple process. And although it's not, let's say, an expense management tool, it's not really a core system like a big ERP or something. It is something that almost, let's say, touches almost everybody in your workforce. Because, at one point in their careers, almost everyone is going to have an expense, whether it's a training expense, you meet with a client, a partner, whatever it might be, everyone is going to have such an expense. So you really need to look at the ease of use and the convenience to make sure that employees are adopting the platform instantaneously, kind of with a zero learning curve. That also will ensure that people in the back office teams will also actually encounter less issues, less people complaining, less support tickets, less errors in the workflow, less incorrect data. So that's really, really key. So also those controller people, you can really help them, unburden them, kind of, save time for them, so they can really use that data to look into that MI information, to look into that management information, and really use that data to make decisions, on your spend, on your policy, on, let's say, maybe even HR information and policies, and really mitigate those peaks of workload. Lastly, really from a CFO function point of view, let's say, the real finance leaders, those are typically people who, the fact of the matter is those are people that really hold compliance and risk in high regard. They are kind of the guardians of the company of risk. And really, for them, there is no gray zone. Maybe for some of us, there might be a gray zone, but for them, it's really black and white. Is everything okay? Is everything compliant? Are we maximizing, for example, the VAT recovery? Are we maximizing, the reporting and the insights that we're getting that to really do and make informed decisions? And now the question, of course, is how are we going to achieve all of those things, right? So how are we going to alleviate the company and really unburden the company and solve those challenges? And there is a variety of, let's say, of functionalities that can help with that. Pretty standard in the industry is, of course, OCR and automation, still pretty important, although it's only one functionality of, hundreds of pieces of functionality of a spend management platform. It is something that's very visible for the end users. And in the end, the users of the platform, 95% of them are end users. So that's why very visible features and functionalities are very important. So you need a very solid OCR experience. Otherwise, again, your back office people are going to get complaints. They're going to have to answer to questions and resolve issues and let's say, support tickets. So really important to also make that easier. That OCR is oftentimes also, supported by a variety of extended, let's call it automation pieces. Think about, attendees joining a lunch, picked up from your Google Calendar. Maybe you're implementing your services, you're a professional service organization, you're implementing your services with one of your clients, you get that data from Salesforce. So you have more, let's say, a collective overview of the spend on that client. And really, in the end, if you can make, let's say, the process easier and more simple, you'll also see that the cycle, let's call it the expense cycle, is going to shorten a lot. especially when it comes to reimbursements. You'll see that you can actually move typically from a monthly reimbursement cycle to let's say a weekly or even more than once a week reimbursement cycle, simply because it's a real-time process. There we go. Now let's talk about transactions. Transactions today in let's say an open banking world, this is really kind of merging and really combining with expense management in the end, because transactions are going to come in real time and they're going to carry much more information. So really the future of expense management is where you receive a transaction, you buy something, within a few seconds you receive a transaction, and immediately you just tag something and you can submit it. So this is truly in real time. This is truly real time, and technology is really enabling that, in fact. So yeah, you have reimbursements linked to your transactions. Again, that spend management platform can enable you to do those payments. Move away. At one point, you need to move away from those expensive legacy solutions and really move towards, let's say, a much more streamlined and one, let's say, clean process flow. Now, we're going to start a little bit about compliance, because in the end, expense management is heavily linked to compliance. Obviously, in the UK, that's heavily linked around the HMRC compliance, especially around VAT and mileages. It can get pretty complex in the UK, but also in other countries, you have, for example, per diems. Pretty complex process oftentimes. Each country is different, especially in Europe, very fragmented. So look to your supplier also for a knowledge base. In the end, as a company, some of you might be growth companies, you don't even want to spend too much time on gathering that knowledge. Even if you get a local, I don't know, a finance team lead or something in each country, it's going to be too complicated to cover everything. So really look to your solution providers for that knowledge base and ensure that they have it embedded in the platform. Because in the end, solutions like Rydoo, thousands of clients in hundreds of countries, it's far easier to centralize it in the platform for you to just activate that and maybe make small amendments specific to the way, let's say, your company is set up, that have that basis, that basic information in there already. And really, when we talk about compliance, it goes much beyond per diems. If you think about per diems, but also mileages, it actually almost leans into the space of HR, where you're also thinking about obviously policies, but also taxable employee benefits. And really, the future here again around that compliance is also going one step further and ensuring that you have the data available, but also out of the box ready-made reports for certain countries, thinking about the UK, thinking about Germany, thinking about Austria, to really ensure that, especially actually across all of Europe, that you're reporting on your taxable employee benefits correctly. Because in the end, for most countries, you have certain limitations. If you pay per diems, there are certain limitations. If you go over those limitations, those per diems become taxable, which has a kind of employee in the end, a personal tax can be a personal tax benefit for your end users. It's pretty important to make sure that everything is correct there. So otherwise you run an audit risk in the end as well. Trying to wrap it up now. Obviously you have a policy center, but again, you need to be able to, to adopt a platform that can go pretty far there, and that can go really further than just flag. You also want to ensure that you can have, automatic approvals based on certain parameters. You want to have really, let's say, not just flags, but also, let's say, budgets in there where you can spend perhaps a certain amount of money on, I don't know, a mobility budget. Today that's become pretty popular. On a mobility budget, maybe per year or per quarter or per month. That actually in the end needs to be justified by a transaction, by a receipt, and so forth and so on. But also the users, they need to be, they need to get that awareness of where they are in those, let's say, within that policy, and how much they can still spend on those budgets. Finally, I think, in the end, going to the last slide here, trying to wrap it up. The future is in the end AI driven. That's where we're going to. really faster reimbursements with minimal control, where you can actually, where you see you'll have processes where 70 to 80% of your transactions, let's call it expense transactions, they go through a kind of automated flow because they meet certain criteria, and they can even go to automatic payments. Of course, you need to have mitigating controls in the process where certain flags or certain limitations or parameters are met, where you want to spend a little bit more attention on those, but really streamlining that, simplifying it, making it more human again, is really going to be the future of the transformation of the expense management platform. So in short, I think that was it.